phases. So let's go ahead and call the roll.
Bentonville,
Here.
State of Chicago 39th Ward,
Here.
Des Plaines,
Here.
Elmhurst,
Here.
Harwood Heights,
Here.
Niles,
Here.
Park Ridge,
Here.
River Grove, Schaumburg,
Here.
Schiller Park,
Good morning, everyone. Schiller Park is here.
and Wooddale.
Here.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our December 16th, 2021 meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
Schiller Park motions to approve.
Second by Harwood Heights.
Thank you.
Real quick,
Any-
Karen.
Yep.
Quick typo, page 3, paragraph 4, misspelling of just weeks.
Thank you, Evan.
Scrivener's there, nothing material.
We will make that correction. Any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, let's do a roll call.
Bentonville,
Yes.
State of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Schiller Park, yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is ONCC member comments. So this is an opportunity for ONCC members who do not have a formal seat on the Fly Quiet Committee to share any thoughts they have on Fly Quiet agenda items before we begin our discussion. So are there any ONCC members who wish to speak this morning? Okay. Hearing none, then we are going to move on to the heart of the meeting. I'll let Ryan.
Karen, that dog was not Frank.
Thanks, thanks, Frank. Did you have anything you wanted to say this morning, Frank, or you're good? Okay. So we are going to get into looking at the alternatives more comprehensively this morning. As most of you heard me say, we are going to keep to our hour-and-a-half meeting time. We're going to start with a review of the revisions to alternative B. If time allows, we will go into a review of revisions to alternative H, but we'll see where the discussion takes us, and we may have to push alternative H discussion to our next meeting. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Good morning, everybody. Before we jump into a review of alternative B, I do want to again remind everyone where we are in the process. We are currently reviewing and revising alternatives B and H, both of which were advanced for further consideration by this committee. Once the committee does agree that one or more of the alternatives best satisfies the requirements of the criteria that you establish for developing a new Fly Quiet program, that alternative will be moved forward to the full ONCC for their review and approval. Once approved, the CDA will package the program and submit it for FAA review and approval. Now, as the program or alternatives currently stand, the elements of the program will be requesting that FAA air traffic make a change to how they operate the airport during the overnight hours. This will be a significant change to how they would operate it on a normal without a program. So this would be a federal action being the FAA air traffic, implementing these changes. Because of that, the FAA needs to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, by considering the environmental impacts of the proposed action and any reasonable alternatives to those actions. So I know there's been some discussion about what the FAA review process will be. It will be under NEPA, assuming that the alternatives as they stand right now don't have any significant changes to them. And also many of the committee members we've talked with have been asking about timing. And I've been very coy about giving a specific answer. And I'm honest because I don't really know how long it may take. We've guessed in the past of how long some of these reviews would take, and we've been very wrong. So I don't want to be misleading or giving any timeline that may, come back and bite me and saying, hey, you guys say, Ryan, you said it was going to take X amount of time, and we're way past that. So once we do package it and submit it to FAA for their review, that would be the time to ask the FAA, since it is their process, for any estimates of how long it would take. So that's kind of just want to make sure we're all on the same page as the process, where we're at, and how we're going to be proposing to move forward. So again, we have gone through the major elements of both alternatives B and H. We've stepped through the primary configurations, the primary headings, secondary configurations, and long runways. We've made revisions along the way to both alternatives. We're now at a stopping point where we are going to take a look back and do a comprehensive review, first with alternative B, to show what changes have been made to date and how they compare to the original alternative as it was first advanced. Once we get through any final review and any discussion of any further needed changes, we will either address those changes, or the committee can advance the alternative forward, where we will talk about procedural and implementation topics. I know there's a lot of topics such as altitudes, as well as other measures that would be included that really should be discussed and added after we fully develop and refine these major elements. So with alternative B, we're going to walk through all of those primary elements and discuss the changes that have been made to date. So the first element we discussed were the primary configurations. So for alternative B, we had 6 configurations, Q, M, L, P, O, and I, that were rotated over a 12-week period. So each configuration occurs twice in the schedule. Each configuration is paired with a secondary configuration to accommodate different weather, whether it be west flow or east flow. The committee did identify a potential issue with what they felt might lead to consecutive impacts on the north airfield with weeks 3 and 4. As you can see, the designated long runway is 9 right, 27 left for configurations L and P. And there was a concern that that may lead to potential consecutive impacts. And a way to address that, the committee chose to swap configurations O and P in weeks 4 and 5 to alleviate that concern. And that allowed a more north-south airfield dispersion between weeks 3, 4, and 5. And this, of course, applied to weeks 1 through 6, as well as 7 through 12. And so that was the major change with the primary configurations for alternative B. We then moved on to primary headings. As you know, the alternative B was developed with 2 vector headings per each primary departure runway in each configuration. We developed 2 vector headings with the intent of rotating those headings throughout the schedule. So each heading is used once. in the schedule, whether it be in the first 6 weeks or on the second 6 weeks. So we then walk through all of the primary departure headings for each runway. The first runway, runway 4 left, originally had 2 vector headings. Vector heading in week 3 of 039 degrees, and then in week 9 in 014 degrees. The committee, after some deliberation of these vector headings, did in the end decide to incorporate a vector heading with a turn. So this is now a single vector heading with a turn. The intent is that the air traffic would direct the flights over a more compatible land use area with the 294 corridor to the north. And so this is a change from that 2 vector heading to a single vector heading with a turn for runway 4 left. The next change came with runway 10 left. Originally, runway 10 left had a vector heading 1 of 100 degrees in week 2 and 115 degrees in week 8. The committee decided to modify the second vector heading of 115 degrees to 110 degrees. You can see that on the right. The intent of that change was to better avoid some of the more densely populated areas. And so runway 10 left now has a vector heading of 110 degrees in week 8. The next runway the committee made changes to was runway 22 left. Similar to runway 4 left, it had originally 2 vector headings assigned to the runway, depending on the week. The first vector heading being 180 degrees straight south in week 6, and then in week 12, a 222 degree heading. The committee decided, like 4 left, to incorporate a vector heading with a turn for both week 6 and 12. So it is a single vector heading as opposed to 2 different vector headings with that turn to better take advantage of the more compatible land use areas on the 294 corridor to the south. Once we got through the primary departure headings, we then had a discussion on secondary configurations with our schedule. The discussion had concerns about, since we made that change of switching configurations O and P in weeks 4 and 5, that some of our advisory members and FAIR pointed out that there may be an issue with consecutive impacts now on the secondary configurations. There was a recommendation to change some of the secondary configurations to alleviate this with new configurations, being those hybrid configurations where we use a rival, a crosswind runway paired with a parallel runway. The committee to date has not is not interested in using any of the hybrid configurations. The hybrid configurations were not a part of either alternatives B and H. The committee did discuss entertaining the change and decided that it was not interested at that time. And so no changes were made to secondary configurations for alternative B. The next element was our long runways. Specifically, the discussion was we have designated long runways that are to be used only if there is an operational need, if the primary departure runway cannot accommodate a specific flight for operational purposes, whether it needs a longer runway or some other reason why it could not use the primary departure runway. And so being that this would be a designated runway in the program, the committee decided it would be in the best interest to assign a vector heading if that runway were to be used. So in alternative B, Depending on the configuration, we have 3 long runways that have been identified: runway 9 right, 27 left, runway 10 left, 28 right, and runway 28 center. The committee opted to use the lower degree turn in each of the headings that they approved in the primary configurations. And so all of the long runway headings have a 10-degree turn off center line assigned to them. So 28 center with 260 degrees, 10 left, runway 10 left, 100 degrees, 28 right, 260 degrees, 9 right, 80 degrees, and 27 left, 280 degrees. So here is an overall picture of where alternative B stands to date, incorporating all of those changes. And so what you see on the screen is all of the arrows depicting the departure headings. Now, as a reminder, again, these arrows are only depicting the departure heading. They're not meant to represent where the actual flight locations may occur. It's more of just a guide to help the committee discuss and decide which vector headings may be best to use. We also have the arrival weeks, all the arrival flights or weeks and runways that would be incorporated into alternative B. As you can see, we both have on 4 left and 22 left, those vector headings with a turn incorporated into this alternative. So with all those changes, we have discussed and decided that alternative B can now be broken up into 3 distinct iterations. And so we have alternative B1, which we are going to call the original B, basically the alternative that was approved for further consideration before any revisions were made. So now moving forward, that alternative would be called B1. B2 and B3 are your current alternatives, except with one major element difference. We decided that the incorporation of that departure heading, that vector heading with a turn for runways 4 left and 22 left, was a significant enough departure change from original B, where you had 2 vector headings for all of your primary departure runways, to a single vector heading, and not only a single vector heading, but one that incorporated a turn to be decided by air traffic, warranted a separate alternative. So the difference between alternatives B2 and B3 are the incorporation of that vector heading with a turn. So B3 is your current alternative B with incorporating all of those changes. And so let me step through those using that same graphic overview. So alternative B1, again, is original alternative B, incorporating all the configurations as originally scheduled, as well as the vector headings as originally assigned, including the 2 vector headings for both runways 4 left and 22 left. Alternative B2 incorporates the revisions to your primary configuration schedule, as well as the vector heading changes, except for the vector heading with a turn. So runway 4 left incorporates a 039 degree vector heading 1 in week 3 and a 014 degree vector heading in week 9. Runway 2 left incorporates that 180 degree vector heading in week 6. And then we used the 195 degree heading in week 12. This was an approved change to the vector heading for week 12 on runway 22 left, prior to the committee adopting a departure vector heading with a turn. So then B3 is that final alternative incorporating all of your revisions, including that vector heading with a turn on runways 4 left in weeks 3 and 9, and 22 left in weeks 6 and 12. So we have with alternative B, we have 3 iterations, all 3 of which do meet the criteria as established by the committee. It is up to this committee to discuss and decide if any of those alternatives best or does a better job of meeting each of these criteria. Of course, we include, it's been a while since you've seen this matrix, but alternative A is basically the do nothing alternative. If this committee is unable to approve a program, the airport would operate as it does today. And so, as we all know, the existing program is broken and it doesn't meet nearly any of the criteria that this committee would like to see in a flight quiet program. So at this point, and I'll defer to Madam Chair as to how you want to discuss, but we can go through each element one by one, or the chair can open it up to discussing any and all. So I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is, if you could leave this slide on, Ryan, I'd like to go down the list. I'll call out each member, and if you could let me know which category you have a revision you'd like to discuss, so that I can then group them accordingly. So please, when I call your name, let me know if you have any revisions that you'd like to discuss, either in primary configurations, primary headings, secondary configurations, or long runways, if that works for everyone. And then we will take them group by group. I just want to get a handle on who should be allowed to sort of speak first and which areas we need to talk in. So Bensonville?
We have no further refinements beyond B3.
Okay. Ward 39.
Same, no further refinements.
Okay. Des Plaines?
We support B3, no further refinement.
Elmhurst?
Yes, we like B3. Just the one thing I do want to point out is when we made the change to the departure off of in that southeast quadrant, going from 115 to 110, that now does not line up with what we see in H. H in its current state has 2 departures, 100 departure, which is 10 degrees off the runway, veering south, and then the 115, which is 25 degrees off the runway veering south, whereas B has the same 110, but the second departure is, or I'm sorry, B has the same 100, but the second departure is 110. So there's a 5-degree difference on that between H, which I would like alignment between those two. If decisions were made that one departure plan is better than the other, then it might be something that we should discuss. Comment.
Thanks, Bob. That was for 10 left. Is that correct?
What is that? What else?
Hours everyone's getting paid time and a half overtime, double overtime in transfers and
Yeah, 10 left.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. Harwood Heights?
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm in agreement with B3 with the vector with a turn. Since you said we can also make a mention of the secondary as well, actually, I like the FAIR's recommendation of swapping out the secondary of I1 to L2. I think that would eliminate any consecutive secondary runway.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Niles? Oh, you're muted, Joe.
Madam Chair, I've got a lot of background noise here. If we could get the other members to please mute their mics when they're not speaking.
Yes, please.
I don't have any comments.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Ernie?
Thanks, Karen. I just thought I might want to throw out there that we could learn from our Zoom mistakes. Apparently not, however. We continue to endorse B3 especially for the inclusion of the dog legs on specifically for the northeast quadrant on 4 left. However, since Mayor Cerny brought it up, I would also like to endorse part of the proposals, and I hope we have the opportunity to discuss, because I think some of the things that were brought up by FAIR have a lot of applicability that we could incorporate into alternative B as it currently stands, and I trust that we will be able to discuss those items.
We will be, yes.
Thank you.
Sure. I don't think Dennis joined us. Schiller Park?
Hi, Karen, thank you. I also agree with L1 and L2 to switching for alternate B. But I also have a question or concern on the secondaries. We have multiple long runway usages going on in weeks 9 and 10. Okay, 9. No, I'm sorry, weeks 8 and 10. Oh. No, hang on a second. 1 second, please. No, we're okay there. Okay, no, I'll just agree with L1 and L2 with how I thank you. And also the third one.
All right, thank you. Can everyone make sure they're muted? We are still getting background noise.
That's what we want.
Okay, Wooddale?
So for the departure and 27 left, is that now 295 set in stone? There's no deviation from the 295 degree heading?
No, if you wanted to discuss refining it, this would be the time.
Yeah, we're opposed to the 295 heading.
Okay. Schaumburg would like to discuss the departure heading, the lesser of the departure headings for 27 left, similar to Alderman Dunn's comment. Felt like the conversation on departure headings was a little more robust as part of alternative H, and so would like to revisit the 280 departure heading. Our recommendation and request would be to move that down to 275, so we'll discuss that as part of the primary headings discussion. Fair. Dan, I know you provided stuff in advance, but do you want to give us an overview?
Well, on secondary configurations, we have some recommendations, and also on headings in general. I guess one falls under primary headings and one sort of under long runways.
Okay, great, thank you. Zach?
Good morning, Karen. We support discussions on the headings on 27 left and a 275 and a 285 heading. We prefer the secondary configurations as is and support the 100 and 110 degree heading on 10 left.
Okay, thank you. Ron?
No comments right now.
Okay, so my notes, and Ryan or Maura, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we don't have any discussion on primary configurations. And we do have discussions on primary headings, secondary configurations, and long runways. Is there anyone who, last call for primary configurations, we'll do it that way. Okay, hearing none. Then what I'd like to do is jump into the primary headings discussion. We need to discuss 10 left, 27 left, and then Dan, I think you had some general comments as well. So Dan, did you have specific runways or did you?
No, recommendation applies to all of them.
Okay, then let's,
The minimum heading.
then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you say your piece and then we'll get into the specific runway discussion. So Dan, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Is this a point where we can reference a slide for the discussion?
Is it? Yes.
Slide 7.
Slide 7.
Yes.
Okay, just a minute. This slide?
Oh, slide 7 of our packet.
Sorry, FAIR's.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So can you tell me what, oh, your slides?
Correct. Sorry.
Okay, stand by.
Okay, Dan, do you want to start talking while he pulls
Yeah,
those
sorry
up?
for all the
No,
dead air.
That's all right.
Our recommendation is really based on the minimum heading in trying to maintain the quadrant separation that the committee began with. And in this recommendation, what we really wanted to highlight, we picked the northwest quadrant because it has some unique attributes, but the recommendation applies to all the quadrants. And that is minimizing the overlap with the arrival corridors. In the case of this quadrant, you have arrivals both on the inboard and outboard runway, which is unique to this quadrant. The other issue you also have is the adjacent quadrant, which is the southwest, is where all the risk of consecutive impacts occur for departures. So in this case, this quadrant only has 2 weeks scheduled for departures, neither of which can be consecutive. And on either side of that lesser heading, they would have consecutive impacts regardless, as alternative B is currently configured. So from the standpoint of a 5-degree heading, there's really no requirement to initiate a turn to be within compliance of the current fly quiet, which gives you a 0.5 nautical mile deviation. And what we also tried to represent here, and we did that with the width of the green box, the length of it with the blue arrow is an estimation of where most aircraft would reach 3,000 feet and turn. And so we think that's another important consideration. When we look at these arrows, the tendency is to assume they continue into infinity, whereas what we really should be considering is their impact, not only within the designated quadrant, but impact to the adjacent quadrant. And therefore we recommend 10 degrees be the minimum, because with that heading, you would at least have to initiate some turn into the intended quadrant to be within compliance of that current plus or minus 5 nautical mile deviation. Thanks.
Okay, let's.
And Madam Chair, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that Dan said. Having a minimum at least 10-degree turn is in the spirit of, the committee trying to disperse flights as much as possible. So I don't necessarily object to that criteria.
Okay, I am gonna run down our list and allow everyone an opportunity to respond to FAIR's comments. So Bensonville.
Still taking a look at it. No comments right now.
Ward 39.
Yeah, I believe I like the idea of the 10-degree deviation here. So heading. So I would agree with Dan on that.
Displays.
I agree with Dan on that, the 10-degree.
Elmhurst.
I think if the trigonometry on that is such that if it's a 5-degree heading and the aircraft can still head straight, we're trying to get them keep the north airfield to the north, south. It may be more advantageous to notch that up to the 10 degree.
Okay, Harwood Heights,
Agreed.
Niles,
No comment.
Park Ridge,
We concur with the analysis of going with the steep return of 10 degrees, with the caveat that in this presentation, we're talking about the northwest quadrant, so we would defer to the northwest quadrant for what their comments are. But as it would relate to the overall airfield, yes, I would concur with Alderman Dunn, which is let's keep north to the north and south to the south. Thank you.
sure, Schiller Park,
Schiller Park also agrees 10% degree difference and keep it all up there. Yes.
Wooddale,
Yeah, I would yield any of my comments to Cynthia from SOC.
okay. I don't disagree with what Dan is saying in theory. In looking at the example he's provided, that is the northwest quadrant. And my concern here is that the 5 degree heading provides much more compatible land uses as it relates to the industrial and more commercial uses that align with Illinois 390. That 10 degree heading puts those flights over more residential land uses. And while I understand that there are still going to be residential homes under the 5 degree heading that are impacted, we'd like to see these flights remain over the more compatible land uses. And so while a 10 degree can be achieved on some of the other runways with, again, kind of to Ernie's point, like if those impacted communities feel that the 10 degrees can be achieved without significant impacts, we're fine with that. But I will tell you, for 27 left, our strong preference is that it remain at the 5 degrees based on those compatible land uses, and following the same approach as with the 422 runways of trying to use the most compatible flight tracks to minimize the overall impacts. So we'll then go to Cynthia.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So we agree with Karen's analysis and would encourage the committee in all of the scenarios to consider compatible land use, more so than just stick diagrams or square block diagrams as represented here. Ultimately, the significant impacts are going to be looked at from a compatible land use standpoint and a decibel increase level, whether that's significant or not. The transportation corridor along 275 is one of the better compatible land use corridors, and we support that. Then with a 10 degree shift to the north at a 285 degree heading, consistent with the most impacted communities' desires, and would request the committee's consideration of the same.
Ron?
Yeah, I agree with Karen's assessment that if you have corridors that are industrial or uses such as that are more compatible, then you should be looking at that, whether it be a 5 degree or a 10 degree. That should be the more important part of it, is try to keep as much as you can over industrial corridors.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Ryan, can you pull up the overall B3 departure headings so we can take a look at which runways specifically do not have the 10 degree turn?
Yes.
I think that'll help narrow our discussion.
Is this what you're referring to?
Sorry, your faces are all blocking it. Yes, that is exactly what I am referring to. So
So currently, all of your parallel runways, 9 right, 10 left, 28 right, and 27 left, have 10-degree offset centerline turns
Okay,
as
Thank
the
you, Ryan.
initial vector heading 1.
okay, thank you. That's helpful. So then I think what we're gonna do is set this discussion aside, since I think we're doing what Dan wants. I think the question is, are we gonna undo it with some of the comments? And then what I'd like to do is go to the 10 left discussion raised by Alderman Dunn. So Bob, do you want to just give a quick overview of your thoughts again for the benefit of the committee?
Sure, and on this one, I would certainly defer to the impacted communities, but I could just recognize that we have a difference between the plan here with B, which is 100 and 110 versus H, which shows 100 and 115. So I think either is acceptable. 5 degrees, we got into the 5-degree discussion just now with the northwest quadrant, but I think it's important that we line those up, and I would defer to the impacted communities on what they prefer.
So just for clarification, and Ryan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the discussion is in regards to week 8 and whether that departure heading should be 110 or 115. Is that correct?
If I understand, yes, Alderman Dunn, yes, that is currently alternative H has the 115-degree heading. That was not changed in alternative H. This was a revision in alternative B, where 115 was reduced to 110. The committee was looking to try and avoid some of the more densely populated areas, as you can see by the population density map in the lower right-hand corner, some heavy blue there. So the idea was to try and avoid that location.
Okay, so we are going to go through all of the communities in our similar round robin fashion. So Schiller Park, you get to go first and weigh in. Just for clarification, at this point, the discussion is focused solely on week 8 and whether that should be 110 or 115 degrees. So Schiller Park.
Okay, Schiller Park would like to keep it 110.
Okay. Harwood Heights.
Yes, I agree with Schiller Park, because if you go to 115, more of Schiller Park is going to be directly under all the noise of the flights taken off. So I would stick with 110, and later on, I think we should change 115 to 110 on H as well.
Okay, thank you. Ward 39.
Yeah. Having problems getting my video going here. Yes, I was originally for the 115, but I will defer to Schiller Park and Howard Heights and support the 110.
Okay, thank you. Elmhurst. Oh. Anything else, Bob? Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have any further comments. I think what the mayor of Harwood Heights pointed out is that there was a favorability for 110 here, and we should revisit that when we start discussing it.
Great, thank you. Park Ridge.
We concur on the 110.
Niles.
We could keep it at 110. Niles believes that.
Bensonville.
I'm fine with 110. I think it's interesting what we're doing here is we're evolving both alternatives into having congruent headings, which will just tee this up for a discussion on the rotation itself. So if that's the intent of the committee, that's fine. That makes it probably easier for us to discuss.
Thank you. Displays.
I defer to the impacted communities on this. If they want the different heading, that's fine as far as we're concerned.
Okay, thank you. Wooddale.
I would also defer.
Schaumburg is fine with the 110 if that is the preference of the impacted communities. Ron,
No comment.
Dan,
Yeah, concur with Alderman Dunn. And part of this is just a issue of fairness as to how to describe to, members in this quadrant, why it's being treated slightly differently. I think the concept of population density isn't necessarily a bad one, but we're assuming that these flights follow that arrow, that distance, and concentrated. Whereas what we know from the current 20-degree headings is the bulk of the aircraft are concentrated at about 10 to 15 degrees, which is going to overlap significantly with your 100-degree heading. So I think while the intention is good, the end result is you're creating a concentrated corridor of departures at 10 to 15 degrees and not the dispersion that's achieved in the other quadrants. So we're still in favor of achieving as much departure dispersion as possible, both in consideration of those arrival corridors and the residents that would be primarily impacted by departures. So the 115 is consistent with the other quadrants, achieves the greatest amount of dispersion. Whether it affects a greater amount of population is somewhat subjective at this point because the FAA hasn't done their analysis. So our assumptions should be based on coming up with a template that's equitable and then let the FAA determine population and noise impacts. Thank you.
thank you, Dan. Cynthia?
SOC supports the 100 and 110 degree headings for the purpose of minimizing those population impacts. And that is based on a contour analysis demonstrating a significant increase from 110 to 115 degrees in those that will be impacted on the ground by a DNL level that stimulates waking.
Okay, thank you. So rather than go all the way through the list again, is there anyone who wishes to speak on the 110 versus 115 departure heading? Any further comments or questions from any of the committee members? Okay, hearing none, then I'd like a motion just so we can kind of wrap up this discussion. So is there a member who'd like to make a motion to confirm the departure heading, what the desired departure heading is for week 8 off of?
I would make a motion for 10 left to retain the 100 on week 2 and the 110 on week 8 departure heading.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Sheila Park will second that.
Okay, Maura, can we get a roll call, please?
Bensonville,
Yes.
State of Chicago 39-4,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you all very much. Next, we are going to move on to 27 left departure headings. Can we switch the slide, Ryan?
Yep. And apologies, I didn't have this for runway 10 left. Schaumburg did in advance let us know that they wanted to discuss this change of 275. So on the left, we have alternative B3 as it currently stands for runway 27 left with vector heading 1 at 280 degrees and vector heading 2 at 295 degrees. The proposal is to change week 1 to 275 degrees from 280. which you can
So,
see right side.
yes, thank you. So for the purposes of 27 left, we are going to take week 1 and week 7 as separate conversations. So we are going to start with week 1, and since this was my request, I will start. We had lengthy discussion about this with alternative H. I've already kind of let you all, and you can see that 275 follows the more compatible land uses. And we think it's preferable to try and utilize Illinois 390 and those adjacent industrial and commercial areas rather than the 280 heading, which goes over primarily residential homes as it relates to the village of Schaumburg. So with that, I am now going to move on to Bensonville.
Thank you, Karen. We have some precedent for using highways as corridors, so I don't have any objection to your 275 heading.
Thank you. Wooddale,
We're good with this.
Des Plaines,
We're good with the 275.
Elmhurst,
I would defer to the impacted communities. So 5 degrees off, even though we had the discussion about that being within the tolerance of not even heading north at all. I think it does stick to the compatible land use down the highway, so it is acceptable. One thing so yeah, that's our comment. Thanks.
thank you. Park Ridge,
While we understand the issue of trying to keep North Airfield to the north and south to the south, we'll defer to the impacted community, and if the impacted communities want 275, we'll concur.
Niles,
Niles feels the same as Park Ridge.
Schiller Park,
Schiller Park will also agree with that also, yes.
Ward 39,
It will defer to the impacted communities too.
Harwood Heights,
I agree with the 275, and FYI, alternative H also has 275.
thank you. Cynthia,
Whoops, sorry. My previous comments stand.
okay. Ron,
My comments from earlier, I stand by them that if there's an industrial corridor there, you should try to use it as much as you can.
thank you. And Dan,
Yeah, my guess is some of these residents are going to be surprised to find out they're designated compatible land use. I thought that was somewhat beyond the purview of this committee in a complex planning process, usually undertaken by the airport owner. I understand the concept behind using a corridor, but again, here we're looking at an arrow on a page and not considering what happens at 3,000 feet. And I asked the committee, not only for this quadrant, but any quadrant, to consider the adjacent quadrant impacts in the north to north and south to south. And if you look at the proposed on the right, the proximity change to what I believe is Itasca, the populated area, sort of under week 1. So while you are trying to decrease impacts in the northwest quadrant, you're increasing impacts in the southwest quadrant. And I think that sort of goes against the criteria of the north to north, south to south. Thank you.
thank you, Dan. Similar to our last conversation, I'll now open it up. If there are any committee members who'd like to say anything additional or ask any follow-up questions, now is your opportunity. Okay, hearing none. Schaumburg will make the motion that the primary departure heading for runway 27 left in week 1 be adjusted to 275 degrees. Do I have?
Bensonville second.
Okay, let's call the roll.
Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39-4,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
Wooddale.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you all very much. We are now going to move to the discussion on week 7. I believe this request came from SOC. So Cynthia, do you want to start?
Sure. So SOC supports a 285 heading in week 7, and that is based on the population impacts. First to create a 10-degree offset from the 275, which took advantage of the transportation corridor and was a suggestion of Schaumburg. That 10-degree offset minimizes the population impacts that will occur in that 2nd-degree heading without going to the more aggressive heading of a 295. And those numbers are significant on an increase for the communities of Schaumburg and Elk Grove Village. Our SOC communities have agreed to balance impacts for everybody, and they support a 285 heading in week 7.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Madam Chair, I do want to speak to one concept there that Cynthia has been discussing in regards to using a term like aggressive for these turns, which I think is misleading. None of these turns that we are showing should be or have been characterized as aggressive. Any of the communities around O'Hare, like Bensonville, Schiller Park, Park Ridge, during daytime hours, we'll see turns much greater than any of the headings we're showing here, such as 295. And nobody, air traffic or the airport, considers those to be something characterized as aggressive. Those turns are made every day in a very safe manner. And so I don't want the committee to be misled that a turn of 295 degrees is something aggressive. That doesn't happen every day at the airport on normal operating conditions.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, Bensonville, you get to go first.
I would appreciate hearing your opinion, Madam Chair, as this does impact Schaumburg as well, but I would be happy to lead off. Just building upon what Ryan says, we see oftentimes during the daytime hours when it's easy to see, we see airplanes turning north or south along York Road, Elmhurst Road, which is the road adjacent to the airport, let alone corridors much further out. 295 is definitely, some aircraft could hit the Bussy Woods area and use that as compatible land use. If the aircraft that couldn't, and we acknowledge that not all aircraft can, we create some dispersion, which is the name of the game. By SOC's own analysis, I will admit that I dissented from SOC's opinion in the letter that was submitted by their own analysis. The 285 heading actually impacts more residents of SOC communities than the 290 or 295. For those reasons that I've just listed, I am supportive of the 295 and do not request revision.
Thank you. So Schaumburg looked at this really carefully. Obviously, 285 and 295 are both going to go through the heart of our community. Apologize for my phone. And so after lengthy discussion and consideration with my village board, Schaumburg supports the 295 heading. We think that dispersion is important. We also think that 295 represents more compatible land uses on the north side of our community with Bussy Woods. We have the greater Woodfield area. We also understand that some of our residential properties in the Woodfield area are higher density, high rise residential, which just have different building characteristics, which make them a little less susceptible to the noise in our opinion. So for that reason, Schaumburg supports 295. Wooddale?
We do not support 295. We're for 285. I'll leave it at that.
Elmhurst?
I think the 295, the 25-degree offset is more consistent with what we're doing on the other east-west runways. And it does appear that there's more compatible land use as we dial that up to the north a little bit. So I would agree with what Schaumburg has indicated in Bensonville in this case.
Thank you. Schiller Park?
Schiller Parks, it's a tough call because I can understand what the Schaumburg is saying, but I also believe in what Zach is saying. I'm not for affecting more people, so I'm gonna go along with Shaq and go with the 285.
Harwood Heights?
Hi, I would like to go along with those communities that are affected. And if the majority goes with either 295 or 285, I will support it. I was toying between the Bussey Woods and then going to a 285, which may or may not affect more people. So I will leave it up to those communities.
Ward 39?
Yes, it's certainly a more difficult choice here. I'm hearing kind of conflicting stories here about who is more impacted, what populations are more impacted. But I'm leaning towards the 295, but like Howard Heights, I would defer to majority of that, the communities in that quadrant.
Thank you. Niles?
Niles would also defer to majority of the communities impacted by the proposal.
Okay. Displays?
I'm leaning towards 295, but willing to hear what if there's a majority that would be for the 285.
Park Ridge?
I think, Chair, I'm going to make a recording at this point of defer to the communities impacted, which is what we'll do in this case. But given what the charge has been for the committee, I think the dispersion makes sense, and we'd be more inclined to 295.
Thank you. Let's see, Fair?
Yeah, I think who we should actually be deferring to is the FAA's 25-degree heading. You know, they did the analysis. They're the experts on the airfield. I think we're getting way ahead of ourselves on population and noise impacts. That doesn't come to the EIS. So the fundamental principle here is dispersion and fairness. And just an arbitrary change to 285 doesn't seem to accomplish either. And in addition to that, when you use community boundaries to denote population impact, since those boundaries aren't equally distributed, and that some are entirely in one airfield, some are entirely in another, some span the airfields, you put some communities at a distinct disadvantage. So I'd urge the committee to look at this from a principle of fundamental equity through the form of dispersion, which the FAA gave us what is arguably a very conservative number at 25 degrees. And I agree with Ryan's comment to that effect. So our recommendation is to keep the 295 and ideally keep that in all the quadrants. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Ron?
Yeah, as my comments about the 275 versus 280 we discussed, you have a huge industrial complex on that side of the airport. It's the only one around the entire airport, and to not use it to the full extent, I think would be a shame and an opportunity lost. So the further north you can push those departures, the more they're going to be over that industrial complex, as well as Bussey Woods later on. So I see the 295 as being the smartest choice here. And as Ryan said, it's not considered radical. All day long, you can see aircraft, including huge wide bodies, turning and going straight up Bussy Road. So I've seen that many times. So I think the 295 makes the most sense, and any turns that would be taking place off of that runway heading to the north, a huge portion of those turns, or the area of that turn, would be occurring over the industrial park area, which is where you want them. You want the noise to be loudest over an industrial park. So I think 295 makes the most sense.
Thank you, Ron. This one was not quite so consistent, so I am going to run through the list again just to give everyone the opportunity to either get clarification or, you know, ask additional questions if they have them. So Bensonville, anything else?
I think I've made my case and I rest.
Okay. Schaumburg, you know, maintains our position as well. Wooddale, anything else?
No.
Elmhurst?
No further comment.
Schiller Park?
Schiller Park, you have to listen to all the discussion going on. Schiller Park is going to go with the majority.
Okay, thank you. Harwood Heights?
Being that I heard that there is a lot of industrial there, maybe 295 is not bad, but again, I leave it up to the communities.
Okay, Ward 39?
Yes, after the discussion, I believe 295 is the best alternative there.
Park Ridge?
Nothing further, Chair.
Niles?
Niles has nothing left to say other than, could you ask, when the vote comes up, could you ask for the impacted communities to go, could you have the impacted communities go first, so I have some idea who the majority is of the impacted communities? Is that possible?
Yeah, I could probably call roll based on my list, because I did organize the runways based on kind of most impacted communities. So unless there are any procedural objections to changing the roll call order, Maura, I'll handle the roll call based on my order, if that works for you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Niles?
No.
Okay. Displays?
Still leaning towards 295.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I can completely respect the idea of deferring to the affected communities, but this committee was formed to represent the entire ONCC and the 60 members. And I fear these tweaks to what I'd call a more standardized or equitable template are going to be very difficult to explain to the full ONCC, as it starts to appear like some members are getting more consideration than others, and that perhaps some at the table aren't being considered. So I think in your consideration of deferring, consider the ONCC members that you ultimately need the approval of that aren't at the table, and whether these changes will look fair to the larger committee. Thank you.
Ron?
No further comments.
Cynthia?
We would encourage the committee to defer to the most impacted communities for the 285 heading from a compatible land use standpoint and the number of people impacted. And to Ryan's statement, we consider nighttime a completely different environment than daytime, as does the FAA. Nighttime operations are penalized by 10 dBA. Our term of aggressive is really based on the increased thrust and the increased noise profile known to be a scientific fact of these aircraft that will be using 27 left, including at least 26 heavy aircraft per night. Our goal is to wake the fewest people. Those people, especially on 27 left, this is a new departure runway that has never been used at night before. So all of these impacts will be new impacts. These are known to be your most difficult complaining community and also the most successful at winning their objectives just due to the amount of aggressiveness they have, not having been impacted before. We see that across the country regularly. So we would request the committee to defer to the SOC and the most impacted communities at 285. Thanks.
Okay. With that, Schaumburg is going to make a motion that we maintain the departure heading for week 7 at 295. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Parker is a second.
Okay. All right. We're going out of order. So everybody look alive. Bensonville,
Yes.
Wooddale,
No.
Schaumburg is a yes. Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove is not here. Sorry. Niles,
No.
Schiller Park,
Schiller Park will say yes.
Ward 39,
Yes.
Harwood Heights.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. I believe that was it in terms of the requested discussions for primary departure headings. This will be a final call for primary departure heading discussions on alternative B. Are there any other departure headings people want to talk about? Okay, hearing none. I'm torn on what we should do. If we want to move into secondary configurations and long runways, or do we want to kind of move on to public comment and then pick up at our next meeting? Is there a preference from the group?
Karen, I'll just offer something. Our recommendation on the long runway should be a very short discussion if you think there's enough time, whereas the secondary headings would probably be a longer discussion.
Great, Dan, I appreciate that. Then let's go ahead and jump in to long runways and see if we can get through that just for the sake of progress, if everyone's amenable to trying to get one more thing off our to-do list today. So Dan, do you have a slide you want to reference?
Yes, slide 6, please.
All right, Brian, we'll pull that up for you. And do you want to jump in?
All right. This is a concept that we have talked about before, and it is one of non-designated departure runways or non-designated long runways. What the committee's done to date is assign the same heading for designated runways as non-designated. In this example, we only are showing one of the quadrants for comparison, which is the southwest, which is the most heavily utilized departure quadrant in alternative B, and west flow, which is the dominant flow. As you can see, there are 4 weeks that are scheduled, 2, 3, 4, and 6, and then that repeats in the subsequent. Our understanding from prior discussions at both Tech and Fly Quiet is that the heavy aircraft will choose both their payload and fuel based on the longest available runway, and that when the longest available runway was not available, that caused great consternation. And so our understanding is they still have the opportunity, regardless of what is designated, to request an alternate runway. Now, that may not always be 10 left, 28 right. That could be 9C, 27C as well in the North Airfield, since that's the longest Group 6. So the concept here is what we call a crossover heading, and to be separate for non-designated departure runways. The concept is to turn that departure, if it isn't in the designated quadrant, back into the designated quadrant. And that's sort of the distinction you see between the upper row and the lower row. Those 3 black arrows, in this case, pointing to the northwest, If you reversed flow to the east, they'd point to the northeast. From the north airfield, they'd point appropriately south. And the goal here really, and the lower one is in combination with another recommendation that won't come probably to the next meeting. The goal here, as you can see from the top line, is to mitigate what we feel is fairly likely with the current alternative B, which is 12 consecutive weeks of departures, not all the departures, but some departures each night. And also note pair the 4 consecutive weeks of arrivals in the southeast. But in this case, we can only deal with those departure requests. So I guess I'll turn it over to comments and questions.
So Dan, can I get clarification? Is there a heading that you are recommending then, and only for the weeks where the black arrow is shown angled? Is that correct?
Our assumption would be whatever the intended heading was in the quadrant that was designated. So whatever the greater heading, for not adding a whole bunch of other headings to the mix. So in this case, whatever the intended heading for the northwest quadrant was, the greater heading, this would follow that heading. Just so air traffic control doesn't have so many headings to pick from. So it's not a new heading, it's whatever the existing greater heading is. Does that make sense?
I just want, so it would be, so for example, if we look at week 1, then the long runway would have a 25-degree heading to the northwest. Is that correct? Because 295 was just selected.
Whichever is the greater. It
Okay.
doesn't make sense to only turn at 5 or 10 degrees. You wouldn't. So whatever the greater heading is for that quadrant, in whichever week, air traffic control would assign the same heading to the non-designated runway. And our assumption is this won't be a lot of aircraft, but the committee should assume at least a couple a night. And from the feedback we got from residents from IFQ, what was objectionable is just some residents never got a break. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Yep, sorry.
Can I add to this?
Ryan, is that you? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
So yeah, so if I'm understanding correctly, and Dan, please correct me if I'm not, what we're talking about here is, something we have talked about in the past. The Department of Aviation is committed to, this concept of North Airfield and South Airfield, this alternative as well as alternative H. This was one of the characteristics that really got this committee interested in these alternatives, is not only alternating west flow and east flow, but also North Airfield and South Airfield. And the city has, completed construction of the runways on the North Airfield. They have had discussions with the airlines and air traffic as well. For departures, especially, the runway lengths are sufficient enough to accommodate 99% of the operations that are going to be occurring at night during this future program. There may be one off flight that absolutely needs 13,000 feet, but nobody has really thrown a flag and said that is going to happen in frequently enough to warrant putting another heading on a runway that's not even currently assigned in any of your configurations as a primary departure runway or a long runway. So I guess I hazard to start making this overly complicated by putting in additional vector headings to scenarios that, with the intent that they would not occur in a frequency that would, in my opinion, warrant it. I think it's a bit overkill. And I also caution that, air traffic may think, this is starting to get a little bit too complex, and we don't want to be giving a lot of variables for air traffic to consider every night. And so we want it to be as predictable as possible, not only for the communities around the airport, but as well as the air traffic controllers and the airline stakeholders. So I guess my comment here on assigning vector headings for other runways other than your primary departure or the designated long runway is a bit overkill.
And that's a fair assessment. And we sort of boil this down to the debate of possibility over probability. Is it possible they won't request these runways? Yes.
Yeah, I can't say with 100% certainty that that will never happen, but.
Right. And also just to tie in another point, and depending on which way the committee goes on this, this is pretty much an identical concept when you get to the idea of maintenance and construction alternatives. If you want to maintain that quadrant predictability with the loss of a single runway, which we know from IFQ, 60% of the rotation was lost to basically runway maintenance. So this isn't a concept unique just to this circumstance. It's one that would also potentially be applied for what's fairly disruptive in general to the Fly Quiet program, which is when runways are shut down for maintenance. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we'll jump in. Bensonville.
Yeah, I'm still developing my thoughts on this. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion on this topic. I do think there's a couple of things we need to keep in mind of which runways, which aircraft would be requesting long runways. We would presume heavy aircraft, fully loaded aircraft that may have a difficult time making that 295. So we should take that into consideration, or that will have a difficult time making that greater of the headings. What would then happen there as well, though, is we probably would create significant amount of dispersion, which may be advisable. I'm looking forward to what everyone thinks is in the communities around O'Hare's interest.
Okay, thank you. Ward 39.
Yeah, but what Ryan said made a lot of sense. So we're trying to balance the complexity of the alternatives here versus the probability of occurrences. And again, like Evan said, I'm interested to hear what everybody's thoughts on this are. I'm kind of leaning towards the less complexity argument. So,
thank you. Displays.
Yeah, I'm also leaning towards the less complexity argument on this one.
Okay, Elmhurst.
I think some of the main two criteria overall for coming up with a plan is fairness and simplicity. And I just think this is kind of in contradiction to the simplicity. So I don't think we need to really lay this in as an added variable.
Okay, Harwood Heights.
Yeah, what I respect what Dan said, as I was reading through it, I was complexed trying to understand all of this. And Ryan, thank you for kind of clarifying this a little bit. But I think we need to make it simple. That's, I think, the best way to understand it. And of course, our north runways should be north, our south runways should be south.
Thank you. Niles.
I got to tell you, Dan, when I first saw this, I thought this was kind of a nice idea. But frankly, the more I think about it, I think we're opening up a can of worms, trying to work this thing out. That's all I got to say about that.
Thanks, Ernie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan, just a question. If we flip the airport around, we send us an east flow and now it's a 10 left departure instead of a 28 right. Would the intent here be to turn that aircraft to the northernmost departure and say try and turn it to a 065 heading? Is that the intent?
The intent follows all four quadrants. And again, it ties into when we get to maintenance and construction, where you do have to assume the loss of a runway for extended periods. It's the same principle. I can understand the committee's concern about complexity, but you have to look at beyond this, just the long disruptions that are caused by maintenance and construction, and just residents' expectations that if they aren't scheduled to have noise, even 1 or 2 aircraft is going to be objectionable.
Thank you. And Chair, I endorse some of the other members' comments. I understand both sides of the argument, and at this point, I'm somewhat conflicted as to which direction to go.
Okay. Schiller Park.
Right now, Schiller Park does not have comments.
Okay. Wooddale.
No comments.
Okay, I'm going to echo a lot of what the members said. I think it's honorable in intent. I think I think it was Niall's comment of like, or maybe it was Harwood Heights. Like the more I looked at it, the more confused I got. And so I think simple for our normal rotation probably is where I lean, but also Dan, I think you've really hit on something in terms of a future discussion as it relates to construction impacts. And I think at that point, running scenarios where we take runways out of the rotation and then considering the impacts to the quadrants for those extended periods of time and providing headings that kind of maintain the intent of the original plan makes sense. So with that, I think simplicity now, but I'd like to revisit this as part of the construction impacts discussion. Cynthia?
We would echo Ryan's concern with complexity and keeping north to the north. The current plan for the out-long runways is the simple, understandable plan. Additionally, I think the cargo carriers with the new options on the North Airfield are really going to consider their taxi time to get to that long runway, which we believe will parse some of those maybe unnecessary options for the long runway and really only reserve that option to those that truly need it. So we expect those numbers to go down and more cargo type operations to opt for those northern runways, which are now 11,250 feet versus the longest runway they had prior to those, the new construction was 8,100 feet. So there's a significant gain there in length and safety for them to be able to opt for that northern airfield.
Thank you. Ron?
Just something to think about that I think kind of mirrors what Ryan was saying and Cynthia as well, but maybe in a little bit different view of it is, I think we need to be cautious as to how much we try to draw parallels to what happened in the IFQ and the different test periods to what will happen when this program is put into place, because it's a completely different airfield that you're going to be dealing with. You're going to have very long runways on the North Airfield, which you did not have any during the test or the IFQ. So the issues and problems that were happening during those periods with everything defaulting to the South Airfield is not going to be as prevalent under this new scenario. And also, CDA has discussed in the past of trying to work with the committee to try to figure out ways that if the North Airfield is the designated airfield for that week, of closing the South Airfield, and this committee can come up with ways to make it more difficult for an airline or an aircraft to request a long runway for a departure, basically trying to make them prove that they do absolutely need that when it's not supposed to be in use for that week. Because like others have said, most of the aircraft are going to be able to use that 11,200 feet without any problem whatsoever. And there's going to be very few, if even at a minimum or maximum, I guess you could say maybe of one a night, that might want the 13,000 foot, but they may not need it. They probably could use 11,200 just fine.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, I will just open it up to anyone who has additional comments or questions on this topic. Dan.
Yeah, and just want to thank everyone for the comments. And I understand and appreciate everyone's observations on this. And Karen, you're deferring some of this to construction alternatives. I think the concept will be much clearer there. But, and I understand the argument of complexity versus simplicity, but we'll continue to argue from the standpoint of residents, the predictability and equity are most important. And when you boil this down into what air traffic control really has to juggle in a single night, you know, we're showing a 6-week and a lot of arrows pointing around all different directions. They're really only focused on, for the most part, 2 quadrants each night. And as long as those principles are the same, I don't think it's too complex to give residents that predictability and equity. But thank you.
Anyone else on this? So I have one clarification question on the long runways before we wrap this up. So our recommendation was to use the lower degree turn for the headings and the lesser degree turn off the runway that does not have vector headings for our long runway designation. So Ryan, by that understanding, will the change we made to 27 left then apply to the long runway designation for alternative B as well?
I guess I didn't think about that. I guess as that motion applied and the way it was worded, yes. So I guess it would be up to this committee to discuss if that's what you want, is that's what you intended, or do you want to keep that at the 10 degree?
Yeah, so that's what I'm just trying to figure out, how we're going to take action on this, and I want to make sure we're intentional. Dan, is your hand up newly?
Yeah, I can simplify the discussion here because that heading doesn't really apply to that northwest quadrant. And with the graphic you see on the screen right now, ignoring the concept introduced here, all the long runway requests in West Flow are the south airfield. So that designated heading only applies to that southwest quadrant in West Flow.
Well, I think to Madam Chair's question is when the committee made a motion to include vector headings for the long runway designations, it was to use the lower of the 2 vector headings that had been previously assigned for the primary departure headings. At that time, it was 280 degrees. And so now that has changed to 275, correct? And so the question is, does this committee also want to make that change for this long runway vector heading assignment for 27 left in alternative B3?
Okay. My point just is, again, that never comes up in the rotation. It comes up in the primary rotation, but never as a long runway in West Flow. That's just the way those configurations INL. It doesn't hurt to designate it.
Yeah, that was my thought, Dan, is that, you know, we know we're going to get into construction impacts. The hope is that this plan is in place for a long time, and
with that consideration, yes.
Okay, so I guess with that being said, I'd like to take a vote to confirm that the committee's intent is to use the lower degree turn for the headings and the lesser degree turn off the runway that does not have vector headings. The intention there from Schaumburg's perspective is that for simplicity purposes, we should stick with the departure headings we've already approved, as opposed to introducing, in this instance, like a new 280, which is not otherwise included in the plan. So does everyone understand the intent here? Okay, so with that, I will once again make the motion just to keep this moving. Schaumburg will make the motion that we confirm that the long runway departure heading designations use the lower degree turn for the headings and the lesser degree turn off the runway that does not have vector headings. Ryan, you understand what that gets you what you need, right?
For this, yes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, let's do roll call.
Bensenville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights, Mayor, sorry, Harwood Heights.
Yes.
Thank you. Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
Wooddale,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I think we made really good progress today. I appreciate everyone's thoughtful discussion. At our next meeting, we will pick up with alternative B, secondary configurations, and then move into alternative H. So just recommend everyone be thinking about that because the conversation's going to run the same. Our next Fly Quiet meeting is February 24th at 9:30 a.m. again via Zoom. And then I have a public comment to read into the record. So David Dalka lived.
Sorry, he is still on the call. I don't know if he's able to speak. Maybe not. Mr. Dalka, if you are available, you may speak now, or we can read your comments for you. Okay, then.
Okay, so I'll just read it into the record. He lives 1 block south of Jefferson Park. Starting around November 1st, the arrival traffic on 28C has been nonstop on one heading, 24/7, 365. 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. traffic is way up. The planes are flying lower, cell phone calls are being dropped, and Wi-Fi is being disrupted. Neither of these items occurred before. I need the abuse of 28C arrivals down Higgins, maybe? And the lower angles to stop. He's provided his contact information. We've read it into the record, and Harwood Heights, he'd like you to know that he would like to chat. So we'll make sure you have his contact information. And then Suzanne, you have a comment as well.
Okay, I'm going to see, can you hear me first?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I have new speakers today. They weren't working.
Oh.
I just wanted to comment today. I think was a very interesting discussion, but it also seems to me that the SOC and some of the other suburban communities are totally dismissing residents who may be impacted by more than one quadrant with their recommendations. If population impact really is a focus, I'd like to see population from the other direction, i.e. Chicago. And then let's discuss impact dispersion density in impacted communities. I concur with Dan and Fair that today's meeting, I'm seeing preferred deference given to some communities over others. It was my understanding that the ONC should be making decisions holistically for the whole. And as to many of the comments that they want to keep things simple, I disagree. We should be opening up a can of worms in this discussions. We should be looking at every decision we make with a microscope. I'm a regular citizen, and after being on this issue and actively participating by attending these meetings for years, I know the devil is in the details. Simplifying or glossing over issues does not make them go away. I get members are fatigued, so are citizens, and many don't feel their concerns or voices are heard, like the last gentleman that said, please, can someone call me? The decision, the committee, this committee is going to making not enough coffee today. The decisions this committee makes will be permanent. The airport is complex, as are its operations. And so the decisions we make should be have that built in. Also, the ONCC committee has power. You guys can make demands of the airlines instead of suggestions for fly quiet compliance. As a citizen, I've long wondered why, because it seems like their concerns are more important to our concerns. And in closing, I just want to say, and this is sardonic and snarky, and I know it, but if we loved industrial park usage so very much, we should have kept the diagonals. So thanks. But again, great meeting.
Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate your comments. Any other public comment? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Park Ridge.
Second, Bensonville.
Okay, roll call.
All right, Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39 Ford,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Howard Heights,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park, okay. Russ, Schiller Park, yes.
Going.
Wooddale. Okay, well, I guess we're adjourned.
Motion passes. We're adjourned. Everyone have a great day. Thank you all again for your good discussion today.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.